So just a quick introduction to Zeke. He is founder and CEO of Milbotix. After spending 10 years in the industry as a defense engineer, he embarked on a research at the BRL in the fast group CVT, seeking a technological solution for behavioral symptoms for dementia. The research was commercialized with funding and support from Alzheimer's Society, culminating in the launch of Milbotix's first product, Smart Socks. He holds honorary positions as visiting fellow at the Centre for Health and Clinical Research at UE Bristol and honorary senior research fellow at Bristol Medical School. He is also CEO of Zepos, which he'll talk a lot more about since he hasn't told me anything about it. And his research interests are improving the well-being of people with communication difficulties, technological solutions for behavioral symptoms of dementia, and self-powered wearable sensors. So everyone, can we give a warm welcome to Zeke?
Set my timer going so I don't overrun. And advance the slides. Yeah, so hello everybody. Zeke Steer, CEO of Milbotix, which is a University of Bristol spin-out. Also CEO of Zepos, which is a University of Surrey spin-out. And both companies are really advancing the boundaries of wearable devices by embedding sensing capabilities in the items of clothing that we wear every day. I've called this talk From PhD to Product, spinning out research to create real-world impact. And I think this reflects a frustration that I had when I was doing my PhD, that a lot of research languishes in academic papers and doesn't actually deliver the impact that it could if somebody invested the effort in bringing it to market. There's a talk in 3 parts, so I've tried to break it down so it's a bit more interesting, I guess. So firstly, speaking a bit about my journey with both companies, explaining what it is that we're doing, how we got there, then talking a bit about the spin-out landscape in the UK, but also looking internationally, and finally concluding with some key learnings that I've taken along the way, which will hopefully help people that are interested in going on a similar path, and I'll have some time for questions at the end. So my own background is as an engineer working in the defence sector. Actually, I worked in defence for about 10 years. Initially in an area called force protection. So I was designing jamming equipment that was used in places like Iraq and Afghanistan to prevent roadside bombs detonating and maiming soldiers. I was then very lucky to have an opportunity to work within what was called the disruptive technology division of this company. It was a little bit like a skunk works. They were doing some really exciting stuff, very blue sky. And I was working within a multidisciplinary team, a crack team of scientists, mathematicians, and engineers. And we were looking at social media and using AI algorithms to try and tease out emerging threats. And that was my first exposure to AI, but it was something that I really enjoyed. I then went into a bit more of a sedate role where I was working in the surveillance space, bringing in different devices, different types of sensing modalities to support UK Special Forces. But it was during this time that my great-grandmother was diagnosed with dementia. She was a very proud lady, fiercely independent. She wanted to continue living at home, but following her diagnosis, she became very agitated, very aggressive, and it became difficult for my family to support her at home, and so she was placed in a care home. Many people with dementia find that transition to care home life difficult. It's very disorientating for them. They lose all their grounding. They lose access to memories that they might have had before of loved ones. And that was the case with Kath. She really, really struggled. She became even more agitated, even more aggressive, socially withdrawn. She didn't want to speak to anybody. And she tried to escape on several occasions. And it was really, really difficult, not just for me, but for family and obviously for her. So it got me thinking about how technology could help the growing number of people like her who were facing challenges with dementia. And I was lucky that I had that technological grounding through my defence career to draw on. I embarked on a 5-year research project at the University of Bristol, based in the Bristol Robotics Lab. And I was investigating how wearable devices and machine learning can help to detect early signs of distress that somebody who's non-verbal might be experiencing, so that a carer could provide better support. And this is really important because many people with dementia and related conditions have unmet needs that they can't articulate. So that person might be in pain, they might be frustrated with something, they might be confused, but they can't ask for help. And so it's very difficult for carers to support them in the right way. And that's why behaviour often escalates and has very negative consequences for people. So I was seeking a solution that could detect these signs of distress, that could alert a carer and allow them to intervene in an appropriate way. I also started looking at, in response to focus groups with care teams, some sort of technological intervention that could temporarily distract a person with dementia, because carers are very, very busy within the care home. They can't always respond immediately. And so this led me to a project at the Osaka University in Japan to build a robotic therapy doll that would be triggered following the recognition of distress, that would start to animate, and that would allow that person to, in a way, engage with this object until a member of the care team could attend to them. I think one of the most interesting parts of this project was work that I did with care teams, and I saw St. Monica Trust mentioned on one of the previous slides. So they were actually a collaborator on this research project. And I was going into care homes, speaking with care teams to understand why wearable devices aren't more widely used, because there's so many opportunities for older people, but within care homes, these devices just don't really exist. And it was very interesting. So I found that certainly for people with dementia, devices on the wrist can be quite irritating. It's a device in a very visible location. People with dementia are known to fidget with devices on the wrist. Those devices often end up being removed and they may be lost or damaged. So the fact that it's so visible is problematic, and it can also be stigmatizing. In addition, for somebody with a cognitive impairment or a sensory impairment, it's very difficult for them to engage with a complicated touchscreen device. And this means that these devices generally don't work for this population. In addition, a lot of the consumer grade devices certainly are tested on younger adults. And actually the characteristics of the skin of older adults are quite different from younger adults. And that means that these devices aren't as accurate. So with Milbotix, we're taking that research that I did several years ago now and building a solution that can be used within care homes to identify when distress is rising, alerting a carer who can then intervene in a timely way and hopefully avoid the use of these very harmful antipsychotic medications. So about half of people with dementia experience these behavioural changes, just like my great-grandmother. Within care homes, they're often treated using antipsychotics, which increase the risk of falls, increase the risk of adverse cardiovascular events, increase the risk of early mortality. The guidance is that these medications should only be used as an option of last resort. But because there are no other options available, they're all too frequently used as a first-line treatment, and that's having a major impact. So I hope with our product, we can reduce the use of those medications. We've also taken a bit of a steer from the market, and there's a lot of money going into fall prevention right now. The health economics of falls are really well understood. So the UK spends over £2 billion a year just treating or providing surgery for hip fractures. And that's only one element of the cost base of a fall. So it's a massive problem. A lot of other people, once they go into a hospital, aren't admitted back out or discharged into the community. The reason being that they become very frail, they become deconditioned. So it's very difficult to make that case that they can live independently. But if you can prevent that fall from happening, you can avoid all of the longer term consequences. So we're covering both of these problems with our product. And here's how it looks. So we've designed the socks with the needs of older people in mind. They have a very stretchy, what's called a honeycomb welt or cuff, acknowledging that many older people have swollen ankles due to edema. They also have flat toe seams, padded soles, so they're safe for people with conditions like diabetes, where the skin is very fragile. We have sensors knitted into the sock, but also more conventional sensors within a tag on the ankle. And we're working to miniaturize the size of that tag. So this isn't the final product. This is what we're calling a prototype at this stage, but broadly it encapsulates the sensing capabilities that we need. And those capabilities include measuring pulse rate and pulse rate variability, electrodermal activity, which is a sweat response and a measure of physiological arousal. We also measure temperature, and we have a 6-axis inertial measurement unit in the socks, which gives us information about how the person's moving. We transmit this data wirelessly to a cloud, and there we have some advanced algorithms that interpret that data and generate an alert on the carer's smartphone when the person requires support. The smartphone app is designed for use primarily within a care home, but we're thinking about use within the community, and that's very close to my heart, given the experience I had with my great-grandmother. At the moment, we present a dashboard of all of the residents that can be grouped by area in the care home or floor. Each resident has an associated level of need, which uses a traffic light system, green, amber, red, along with the person's left in distress, unattended, the higher that alert will reach. And if a carer clicks on a resident through the app, they can see the kind of support that's effective for calming the person down, the sorts of triggers that can cause them to become more agitated, and they can also capture observations of behaviour that they're seeing on the ground. So we're building essentially a digital ABC chart, antecedents, behaviours, consequences, a means of wrapping up the information about a person's behaviour so that carers can see at a glance how best to manage it. We are in a commercial phase at the moment, so we have a prototype of this product which we've been deploying in pilots, but we're also offering to outside organisations early access to this product so that they can evaluate it within their service. And we've gone quite broad. We've got domiciliary care providers that provide care for people in their own homes. We've got specialist care providers who manage very complex behaviours. We've got local authorities. We've got housing associations, residential care providers, and also the NHS piloting the system. Research is very close to our heart, though. We need to be able to prove ourselves that the product is delivering benefits. And so we've been working with a number of organisations, including the UK Dementia Research Institute, to build a base of evidence that we can start to talk about to our customers. We also have an offshoot that we call Smart Socks Discovery, which is intended for use within research. And this gives researchers a means of collecting physiological and movement data from research participants where those participants might not tolerate a device on the wrist very well. And we have lots of projects, research projects underway. A project with a company called Hug by Laugh, who've developed a therapeutic comforter supported by Alzheimer's Society. So that device has been shown to be effective at calming people with dementia down. We're linking the delivery of that intervention to the information that we get from the socks so that it can be provided in a much more responsive way, and so that we can understand when the person is actually calm following the introduction of that intervention. I also mentioned that we're working with the UK Dementia Research Institute, so we're looking at how the socks can be used most effectively within the community for people who are living more independently and want to remain so. And we're continuing to expand our evidence in care homes through a project with Brunel, University of London. And we're very fortunate to have just received an Innovate UK grant that's going to enable us to move that research into the next phase. Lots of other projects that we're supporting through a competition that we ran quite recently. The socks are being used within sports applications. They're being used to understand physiology in people with diabetes. They're being used for people with learning disabilities, stroke patients, Down syndrome, lots of different applications that the socks are providing benefits for. And I think I touched briefly on our roadmap. So we've had feedback that the tag at the moment looks slightly criminal. It's obviously quite large, has associations with electronic monitoring that the police might do to somebody. So we've taken on board that feedback. We're miniaturizing down the tag. We're adding new sensing capabilities. So we've got a new sensors going in there that allow us to understand additional physiological parameters from the person. And we're also thinking about the community use case and how we can allow this technology to be introduced seamlessly into somebody's own home, even where that person may not necessarily have Wi-Fi or good internet access. And it's through this roadmap that Z-Pulse comes in, so I'll bring that up shortly. This is a few images of the electrodermal activity sock that we have, which is intended to measure physiological arousal. So this is very much orientated towards stress, but we're introducing additional socks that connect to the same electronics and provide other sensing capabilities like plantar pressure measurement, which is really important for understanding changes in the person's balance. So coming back to that fall prevention angle, this is one of the means by which we are entering that space. And here is just some dynamic pressure maps showing data we've collected with a sock that's been developed by Z-Pulse, which is the other role that I have. So Z-Pulse are using triboelectric nanogenerators to sense very minute changes in pressure and also shear forces. And the advantage of their technology is, number one, it's very, very inexpensive, but it can also harvest energy from the movement of the wearer. And because we know that we need to shrink down the size of the electronics, and the battery being one of the largest components in the electronics, this is really, really interesting to us. So very exciting to be progressing an opportunity with Z-Pulse to improve our product longer term. Okay, that's the first section of the talk. I'm going to talk a little bit about spin-outs now. So what is a spin-out? It's a company that originates from research carried out at a university. There's a bit of a misconception that in order to be a spin-out, the university has to have some stake in the company. That's not the case. I'm very fortunate with Milbotix that I was able to negotiate with the university so that they didn't get a stake, and I retained all the equity. In addition, the university doesn't get any royalties on any sales that we make. But with the University of Surrey spin-out Z-Pulse, the conversation went a different way. They not only got a significant equity stake, but they also get a royalty payment for every sale that Z-Pulse makes. So it just shows how, depending on those negotiations that you have, you can get a different outcome, and that can have a long-term impact on the company. What a spin-out is not. We hear about these tech titans and we get very excited when we see the power that they wield, and we think about how dramatic it must be to be able to run these large companies and have so much sway. But the reality is, for a very early stage company, you don't have any of that power. You don't have any credibility. You're in the trenches day in, day out trying to build a business, and it's not at all easy. And you might go through that journey. You might spend 10 years building your company, and that company might fail, and then you might walk away with nothing. So it's really, really not for the faint-hearted. Companies typically go through several stages, which is linked to the investment that they need to bring in. So at the very early stages, you're in the pre-seed or seed stage. The valuation of the company is quite small. As a result, you can't really bring too much investment into the company, because if you do that, you're going to be selling a lot of the company, and you're not going to have any equity at the end of that journey in order to ultimately benefit from the company's success. So you're working under significant constraints. As you go through the venture or growth stage, the valuation starts to increase. You can evidence that there is real traction, there's real need for the product. You achieve what's called product market fit, where you have a value proposition, which is really connecting with customers. And at that stage, you can start to raise bigger tickets. 1 million to 3 million pounds would be typical. And then finally, once you're established, then you can start to look at pension funds and other large investment vehicles to bring in the money that you need. There's something called the valley of death. So if you think you're developing a product, you don't have any customers, you're spending a lot of money to build that product, you've got no revenue coming in. And you may get to a stage where you've spent so much building the product, you've not had enough money come in, that the company fails, and that's the valley of death. What investors hope you will do is you will spend that money, you will go into the valley of death, but then customers will start to buy, and it will take you out. But that is a big risk, and it's especially a risk with hardware companies, because with a hardware product, you have to invest a lot up front. It's very capital intensive. You can't really iterate in the same way that you can with a software product. And so the risk profile is quite different. And if you don't get that first iteration of the product right, after spending all that money, then you really have no means of climbing back out of the valley of death. So it's very, very, a lot of investors are very, very concerned about it. A lot of the investment goes into the United States, China in second, but the UK fares pretty well, actually. We do very well in global tech. We're also top in Europe, so and mainly deep tech and life sciences are our specialism in the UK. Looking at which institutions spin out the most companies, we've got University of Oxford, University of Cambridge, as you might expect, at the top. But we've also got University of Bristol down at the bottom. So Bristol does really well. We've had some very successful spin-outs. I think Graphcore was one of the spin-outs. Yeah, we've done really well globally. Looking at where the spin-outs are operating in, so biotech and pharma very, very big sectors. But we've also got robotics, medical devices. So any high tech is well placed in Europe. And most valuable European spin-outs, BioNTech, who developed the COVID vaccine, they were a spin-out worth £25 billion today. So that's an example of a company that have done extremely well. In the UK, just 10 universities are responsible for over half of the spin-outs that we have. And unsurprisingly, you've got Oxford and Cambridge at the top. Again, some of the bigger universities listed here. A lot of the spin-outs operating in the pharmaceutical space. And speaking to the failure rate with spin-outs, so only 5% have actually exited in the UK. And that's quite worrying. When you see that, you're in a spin-out yourself. By all means, there's no guarantee that you're going to succeed. Yeah, I'll skip over this one. So some of the challenges. And I mentioned before that depending on how those negotiations go with the university, you might get a very good deal or you might get a very bad deal. And the problem with a bad deal is investors will be looking at the terms that you've agreed and may not put money in to support that journey that you need to take if the terms are seen as overly burdensome. So it's really, really important, not only for your own interest that you want to maximize the equity that you hold, but also for the interest of the company that you have that negotiation, that you get a good result from it. Only a tiny proportion of the overall funding going into companies goes into that very early stage. I think it's about 5%. And there are a lot more of those very early stage companies than there are more mature companies. So it's extremely competitive. It's very difficult to get a foot in the door, to get early investment that you need to start to build the business. We've got a problem with diversity. So female and ethnically diverse spin-out founders are underrepresented. I think only about 1% of founders are black, which is crazy. I think with females, it's also very, very small, but it's increasing, but we need to do a lot more. We've got to consider as well the global macroeconomic climate. We've got wars happening all over the world. We've got a lot of uncertainty, and that means that investors are holding back on putting their money into more risky investments, and that's affecting a lot of businesses like ours. The other final problem is that for that later stage funding, the UK doesn't really have much activity. So companies tend to look overseas to the US, for example. And that means a lot of companies that have been very successful, that have come out of the UK, end up being owned by the US, and that's quite tragic. So again, we need to do a lot more. There's a lot of detail in here. I'll share these slides after, but I'm going to skip over some of this material just in the interest of time. Right, let's get on to some learnings then. So I've had lots of conversations with early stage founders, and typically the conversation goes along the lines of, I'm developing an exciting business. And I say, what is that business? And they say, I can't tell you. I say, well, why not? Oh, it's secret. I've invested a lot of time in this. I can't share what it is that I'm doing. And I think there is a concern there that somebody's going to steal that idea. But actually, as a founder, there are so many other threats that you face that somebody stealing your idea is probably not necessarily going to be the top priority. The reason most startups fail is that they run out of money. And this happens also often to do with the valley of death. You spend money on building your product. You can't come out of the valley of death in time before you run out of cash, and so you die. Another big problem is that there's no actual need for what it is that you're building. So again, you invest a lot of money related in building this product, bring it to market, you find out nobody's buying it. What are you going to do? Valley of death. Some of the other reasons don't happen all that often. So I would focus on those two as being top priority. You need to be very, very careful with how you steward money that you bring into the business because it's so short in supply. Related to that is this idea that you should build products iteratively, start with a mock-up, get that out to customers as soon as you can, start to collect feedback from customers, real-world feedback that will guide the development process, rather than investing all of your energy into building something that you think is perfect, getting to the market and finding actually nobody wants this thing. Now, there's a really good book called The Lean Startup, which explains how this iterative process works. It's very, very software focused. Hardware is quite different. Because you have to certify a hardware product, it means that you can't iterate in quite the same way. But there are certainly creative ways that you can bring this methodology into the hardware business. Another lesson is to manage expectations quite carefully. So we were very lucky that we had some publicity very early in our journey. We managed to get on the BBC News. We had international news covering us and talking about how amazing the product was. And we were absolutely overwhelmed with this interest from customers, which you think, that's fantastic, but we had no product. And so these customers are saying, look, I want to buy this now. It's going to really make a massive difference. How can we run a trial? But we couldn't do anything with all that interest. We just sort of let it lie, and it died off. And it's quite a wasted opportunity. So I think you've got to be really careful with, you know, if you're going to go out and talk about what you're doing, ensure that you do it at the right time so that you can capitalize on any interest that comes through. There's also this thing called the technology adoption curve. And the idea is that in the very early stages, when you're starting to sell your product, you don't have a lot of credibility, but you're going to find some innovators who are really connecting with what it is that you're doing, with the benefits that it could provide for them, and that are willing to work with you, accepting that the product maybe isn't fully developed, maybe it isn't as easy to use as it could be. As you get more mature with the product, then you can start to approach customers who are perhaps more risk averse. And this is the early adopters, the early majority, but you're building on the evidence that you've collected with those innovators at the very early stages in order to enter into those conversations with more risk averse customers. If you don't properly map out which customers to approach at each stage, then you're probably going to fall flat. So, for example, a lot of health tech companies say, I'm building this product, I'm going to sell it into the NHS. But the NHS are right towards the far end of that technology adoption cycle. And if they are your sole customer group, then you're going to be waiting a very long time for them to adopt the product. You're going to hit the valley of death. You're going to run out of money. So you need to find other customers that are a little bit less risk averse. With investment, it's usually linked to a milestone plan. So at each stage, investors want to see that you are achieving what you said you would achieve in the previous stage. They want to see that you're making progress in the business and that their investment is going to take you to a place that is way beyond where you are now, that it's going to increase the valuation of the company and ultimately give them a return on their investment. So you have to think quite strategically about what it is that you're doing now, what you might push out into the future. Because if you can't raise the investment you need, then the company is going to fall flat again. There's this lens of risk and value. I actually stole this from somebody else, but it's really, really powerful. So everything that you do as a company, you look at through this lens of what value can I get from this activity or from working with this person, this employee, this supplier, and what is the risk to me if I fall foul, if things go wrong with that person, with that supplier, if I'm unable to deliver for that customer. And it's actually really, really powerful because not only does it apply to you as a company, but all of your customers, all of the people that you're working with are thinking in the same way. So if you can maximize the value that you're providing and minimize the risk to those customers, then you're going to do a lot better than if you didn't think in that way and cover off those concerns. Particularly in the commercial space, there are a lot of people out there that I would say are quite predatory. And if you're a technical founder and you don't really have a good understanding of commercials, they will come into the business, they'll promise you the world, and they'll fail to deliver. And ultimately, things will fall apart. And it's very difficult to identify these people because they're good at selling themselves primarily. They might say that they're good at selling products and services, but really they sell themselves. So you have to be ever so cautious about who you work with. And we've been through lots and lots of people. We're looking for the right people, the right fit. So just keep that in mind. Again, related to that, a lot of what you do as a founder is interacting with people, is persuading people to your way of thinking, trying to get outcomes that are favorable for you and your business. And I'm an engineer. This is not natural to me. I'm used to just sitting in front of a computer and banging out keys. But it's really, really important if you are not a social butterfly, that you try and understand the mechanics of those interactions so that you can get the best outcomes. I touched on this before, but as a tiny startup, you don't really have any credibility. People haven't heard of you. They don't really care about you. They don't see you as something that is going to even exist perhaps in a year or two. But if you can partner with some of these bigger brands, it means that you become stronger in their eyes. You become more credible, and that starts to open doors and bring new opportunities your way. So we're very lucky with Milbotix to have Alzheimer's Society as a very early partner, and talking about smart socks in relation to Alzheimer's Society helps us become more credible in the eyes of customers. Final point is about investment. So there are two types of money, what they call dumb money, which is just money that an investor gives to you. You spend it however you want. And then there's also smart money, which is money, but it comes with expertise. It comes with contacts, with access to different networks. One of our investors is British Design Fund. They focus specifically on impact-related hardware. And their chairman became our chairman. They have brought a huge amount of mentoring and experience into the business that we wouldn't have had without them. And they've done that for practically nothing other than the money that they put in as investment. So if you do have the option of choosing where to accept money from, certainly look out for these investors that bring smart money and not just dump money. So that's my half an hour. I've now got 20 minutes for questions. So yeah, please shoot. Thank you.
Questions in person first, and then if there's any questions, chat, we can get that.
Hi.
Hi, yeah, really fascinating work that you're doing. And is there any scope for predictive knowledge with trying to predict if a person or patient's going to become, or person with dementia is going to become agitated for all of these metrics that you use, these parameters, in the future with wearable?
Yeah, that's exactly the focus. So it's no good if you detect that the person's already agitated, because then the scope of what you can do to support them is quite limited. What you want to be doing is detecting those very early signs so that carers have that window of opportunity to intervene in a lighter touch way. Similarly with falls, once a fall has already happened, the person's on that pathway, the opportunities to better support them are quite slim. But if you can predict through changes in how the person's moving, through other information that you have, like the person's history of falls, medication regime, that sort of information, then there's a lot more that you can do to prevent more adverse outcomes. And it links in with the UK government strategies. I'm sure you're aware that the NHS 10-year plan, it's all about prevention now. It's all about providing care close to people's homes. And that's exactly where we are. And I think that's a really valuable opportunity.
One other question I have is the technology with the soccer university, where you were looking at these supports. Was it support?
Oh, the hug.
Is that hugs?
Yeah.
With these devices, do they have like a personalized aspect to them, such as like the voice being from like friends and family, or anything else that would help reassure these people who are quite agitated?
It's a very good question. Yeah, they do. So I didn't mention much about the technology, but it's essentially a teddy bear with long weighted arms that you can wrap around the person. It does have a music player, so you can stream music to it, and reminiscence therapy is something that's really effective for connecting a person with dementia to their past and giving them a sense of security. It also has a beating heart, and actually that's really effective. So I've held the hug myself, and it does help you feel a lot calmer.
Yeah, I wonder, for the context of the spin out company, if you have a project where you collect some of the data, then who will be the owner of the data set? It will be the university or the company?
So the data is stored on our servers, which are hosted by AWS, but technically the ownership of the data is with the university, and if they want to delete the data, they can put in a request and the data will get deleted. We do have a condition or a term within our terms and conditions of sale that we can use the data to refine the product. And so when a customer signs up with us, then they're agreeing to us being able to access the data for product refinement purposes purely. But we would never obviously share that data with a third party.
I saw on one of your early slides you had the iCure logo
Yes.
on it. Did you
Yeah.
do iCure and the big one? And if so, what was the biggest learning or outcome from it?
So with Zeke Pulse, they went down that route with the iCure program.
Sorry, they might do the.
It's an Innovate UK program which is intended to fund research translation, as they call it. So research that's been developed within a university, moving that into a more commercial type operation. So the experience with Zeke Pulse is that they set out to trial their technology in a range of different use cases. It's a technology platform that has lots of verticals. They can use it within sports and fitness, within healthcare. If you look at healthcare, there are again different verticals. So it's gone quite broad. And the idea was that we would be able to use some of the progress in order to then bring in investment on the back of that. But what we found is that because we went so broad, investors are telling us, well, you've got no focus. Why didn't you just go down one route and make a lot of headway rather than going quite scattergun? But I think we were still in that exploratory phase. We needed to go broad in order to narrow back in. So there's a bit of disconnect there between what the program provides and what investors are looking for at the end.
I was just going to say, we have a question from online, from Luigi Moretti, who asks, when would you recommend searching for acceleration or incubation programs? For example, should we wait until we have completed our PhD, or should we start looking while we are still studying? And what should we look for when looking for acceleration or incubation programs?
It's a very good question, and I know Luigi is a user of our product. So my reflection on Milbotix and Smart Socks is I wish I'd incubated it for longer within the university environment, because when I went out to investors, I didn't really have strong evidence that the product could provide a benefit for somebody with dementia. And that's always a challenging conversation to have with an investor. Yes, we've got this really exciting technology that we're developing, but no, we don't have the evidence to support what we're saying we're setting out to do. Having said that, I did get a lot of support through a program called Conception X. So this is a venture science program. Some of you might have heard of it. It started at the UCL, and they're now completely independent of UCL. But they target PhD students who are interested in doing something with their research, commercializing it, and they provide you with the skill set that you need in order to engage with investors. They also provide you with confidence, most importantly. So for somebody who's doing something completely new, it can be quite scary. You're stepping out of your comfort zone, comfortable world of research into a very different environment, but they give you that confidence to go out there and do that. So I think, my advice would be try and keep the development within the research world for as long as possible, but start to look at some of these programs that allow you to gain the skills and the confidence that you need, so that when you are ready, when you've got the evidence that you need to back up what you're saying you're going to do, you can just switch into that mode. You've got the skill set, away you go, and hopefully you will succeed that way.
I got a few questions, but I'm probably just go one at a time.
I'm taking notes on your laptop.
I will take some questions.
Yeah.
So how long does the sock last, and how much would it cost? Because unlike a smartwatch or something, you have to replace it. You can't wear the same sock all the time.
Yeah. So we specify the socks for 50 washes. They are machine washable at 40 degrees C. The electronics generally removed from the sock for charging, but they are safe if they go in the wash. And that was something that we had to do for safety reasons.
The next question from Jen. I think on one slide you said like the Turkish Basketball Association was using it and stuff. Why would they use it compared to use your socks rather than like a normal like a wristwatch or like a Whoop, for example? Just because I know your socks are like suitable for like your demographic, like people with dementia, but basketball players, I assume they have no problems with that. So
I don't know. There might be a safety hazard actually if you've got a rigid device on the wrist and you're jumping for a ball. Who's to say you're gonna hit somebody with it? I don't know exactly what the reasons are, but yeah, that would be one obvious advantage of our socks.
Regarding your different negotiations with Bristol and Surrey, did any of that come down to the fact that on the first you were a PhD student and possibly owned more of the IP by default compared to being a paid researcher? No, not at all.
No. So at the start of the Farscope program, actually before it even started, it was the interview that I went to after being shortlisted to go on the program. I had the conversation with Arthur Richards. I said, what happens to the IP? I'm very keen to go on that commercial journey. Will I retain ownership? And I was told categorically yes. But having come to the end of my research, I then started speaking with the university again. And I was told actually it's a decision for the supervisor. So if they believe that they have contributed to that piece of work, then they have a right to say, actually, no, the university has a stake. I was lucky that I had a very good relationship with my supervisor and that they were happy to say, yeah, it's Zeke's work. I've not had too much of a contribution to it, so, go away. But those conversations could go a different way. And I think every institution is very different as well. I didn't show you the slide, but the discrepancy between, I say Cambridge, which I think take about 5% equity, and some of the others, it can be up to 30-40%. So every case is different, and you've got to just be aware of how those conversations could go, and obviously fight for the best outcome.
I was going to ask about that, so if you stole my question.
Question about like data sharing. So I'm assuming most of this data is going to the people looking after, in a care home, for example, the people looking after the people who've got dementia. Is there any scope for friends and family being able to access the data as well?
It's a really good question. Yeah, so we've had that conversation with care homes, and actually a lot of them are a little bit cautious about sharing that information with families because it could highlight things that they're doing maybe not so well, or that families might become concerned about without justification. I think there is an opportunity there, but it just needs a bit of care to map out exactly how that data is shared. One of the things that we are doing though is talking to providers of, for example, care planning software, which is used very widely within care homes. I think about 80% of care homes use some sort of digital solution. And for us, that's a really effective route to market, because we're going to these companies that are already working with care homes rather than having to make those connections ourselves. So think about strategic partnerships as well. That can really help accelerate your growth.
And for the patients who've got, or the people who've got dementia, is it, do you look at like capacity in terms of like who owns that data? Is it, for example, is it going to the care home? If they decide to share it with family, is that decision they make themselves, or because not every patient's not every person's going to be sitting in a care home.
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. There's something called best interests, which, a decision has to be made in the best interests of the resident. And if the person doesn't have capacity, then there would be a consultee that would be brought in to make that decision. I think that, yes, for a product, that's a concern, but generally it's dealt with through the care home's own processes. For research, it's very, very tricky, because you've got to then seek ethical approval through IRAS, get HRA ethics. It just slows everything down.
Yeah,
but it's a very good point that you raised.
I don't think there's any question in the region. Nothing online. Then if we give our speaker one more round of applause for great talk.